Masterminds have been around for a long time, right? But unless you had a bunch of extra income to throw at it, you couldn't be a part of it. Well, we wanted to solve that problem. And so we're bringing masterminds to you for free. Welcome to Mastermind for the Masses. Hey everyone, welcome to Mastermind for the Masses. I am here with Shanna and Colby as always. And, I just want to kick things off with how this week's been going. For me, I can tell you that actually kind of cool. I got to go see Madonna in concert, which was pretty neat. My wife's a big fan and had the opportunity. So we went and saw her. On a personal note, kind of got to put my parenting to the test this weekend. I won't go into tons of detail about that, but it's not all sunshines and roses. So I just like to call out the real challenges in life too. And I definitely had some tests with that this weekend, but it kind of balances out. Got to see Madonna and also got to deal with my own fun parenting challenges. But it's been my week, so Colby, I notice you and I are both rocking Buccaneers shirts, so I think you should go next on what's up this week.
Yeah, honestly, kind of pretty straightforward week. Nothing extremely new. I ended up working this Saturday morning because we had to do some PC upgrades for some production pieces that were on the floor. So actually had off today, which was nice to balance that out. Yeah, just had a relaxing weekend. Played a bunch of Path of Exile, the video game that I like to play a lot. So just in my PJs still, so just ultimate relaxation mode. Although I did go to the gym today, so it's not completely,
Nice.
not a complete bum.
Nice.
So yeah.
Awesome. In your pajamas?
No, not in my pajamas. I showered and then put them back on.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's it
Gotcha.
for me.
Just had to clarify. One of these days, you're gonna have to share your. One of these days, you have to share your handle with our listening audience so they can find you and play some games with you.
I don't know about that.
Shan, what about you, sir? What's going on with you, man?
No, it's been a pretty quiet week for me as well. I've been spending a lot of time at the beard shop getting everything ready. We've been doing a lot of stock changes lately and bumping up the retail store a little bit. Other than that, I finally got my boat back for the season last weekend, and I've been spending like the entire weekend cleaning it and polishing it and trying to get it back into regular shape. Because to be honest, the last couple of years I've been kind of turning a side eye to it. So, but other than that, that's really it for me.
Awesome, man. Well, great to hear you guys are taking a little recoup on your week because I know work can get stressful sometimes. And, Shan, I believe you brought us a topic today. So, want to turn the floor to you, sir.
Yeah, I did. So what came to my mind is a lot of the topics we've discussed, especially when it comes to motivation, discipline. We theme it towards a certain kind of high energy persona or like a high performance persona. And one thing that's always kind of intrigued me and something that I feel like you guys can really share a lot of knowledge on is managing, and not only just managing, but recognizing work fatigue. And when I say work fatigue, obviously I'm highlighting like the workplace. There's some weeks or months or days where you're just feeling like a top performer. You're highly motivated. You're knocking all the stuff down like 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. goes by and nothing. And then there's other weeks where you feel like you're just kind of stretching by. You're counting down to the days to the next holiday or PTO. And I think it wears the same suit in a personal setting too, as well, right? So like whether or not you're tackling your personal goals or if you have a business, you're also suffering through that work fatigue eventually at some point in time. So what I wanted to bring to you two is one, how do you recognize work fatigue? Do you recognize it as in a time where you're just not feeling very motivated, or do you recognize it as straight up like I can only have a high amount of energy for a certain time period before fatigue catches or kicks in? And not only how do you recognize it, but what do you do about it?
Yeah. Super, super tough. I mean, obviously, I would say at least like the first thing that comes to my mind with this sort of thing is not necessarily to do with recognizing. I'm just going to assume once you did recognize it, like to me, it's outside of work stuff is super critical for being in a good mind while I'm at work. Like if I don't feel like balanced and happy and enjoying the stuff that I do once I get off work for that, period of time, what is it, like 5 or 6 hours? I don't know the exact amount of hours you would on average have before you go to sleep and repeat the same process. But if you don't like, if you don't truly refresh during that time period, getting up and then resetting and going back to work again feels really, really, really tough. And there's like tons of life circumstances I think that get in the way of people getting truly refreshed. You could have kids, you could have big life events going on, etc. So I think it's definitely like out of work stuff can really play a role. And so I think it's important to contextualize why you may be feeling burnt at work, because is it really work that's stressing you out, or is it your personal life that's sort of leaking into feeling exhausted and feeling burnt out while you're at work? That's at least my initial thoughts.
So saying all that, do you recognize that those who might live on a regular like same pace environment, that they so what I notice is there's a lot of people who don't recognize fatigue, and you might have mentioned what you just mentioned without like identifying how you recognize it, but I think us three as individuals are pretty decent at recognizing fatigue, but there aren't some who are, and they're kind of living that day to day without tackling their balance or without strategizing how to get out of that wacky, like just slow pace kind of work ethic.
Yeah.
I think like fatigue is very commonly unrecognized, and it's a huge part on why a lot of people will come up to certain individuals and be like, how do you handle this? Or like, how do you sit in meetings all day? I'm sure you guys hear that often. Like how are you able to sit through all 6 of those meetings and then come back and handle an employee address or like manage a certain group? That's where like fatigue really kicks in and becomes an issue if you can't kind of manage it or recognize it. So I like your personal experiences, honestly, I think shed a lot of light alone. So and especially for you, Josh, someone who has to step in that direct description that I just kind of described of someone who might be sitting through 6 meetings a day and then suddenly having to go and manage and handle some personal situations or some professional situations. How do you go about managing the fatigue?
No, it's a great question. I think it is one that needs more attention drawn to it. And when I think about it, I think we're making strides towards no longer thinking of physical fatigue and mental fatigue as different elements. There's been a big push for mental wellness and trying to get away from the stigma that, if you break your arm, no one gives you a hard time about going and getting a cast. But if your mind is giving you troubles or challenges, there's like been a stigma traditionally. And I think we're breaking a lot of that. But the reason I reference that is because I think it's very similar to fatigue. When your body is feeling fatigued, let's say you're trying to work out and you go running, if you're not 100% up to par, maybe you stayed out late the night before, or, whatever the case might be. And there are moments where yourself and you'll push through that and it's for the better. But then there's other times where if you keep pushing, you might hurt yourself, right? You don't continue to work out through an injury potentially. And I think you have to take a very similar approach when you're talking about work fatigue and the mental impact that it takes on you. If you reflect, if you're at that point, just like if you try to go and bench, a couple 100 pounds and as soon as you lift that bar, you probably have a good idea of whether or not you're going to actually be able to put that back up. And there could be all sorts of contributing factors for it. But I think kind of like you have said before in the past, Shan, people know what they need to do. I think people know when they are in that fatigue mode. I think what you have to do is be willing and courageous to acknowledge that. It's not a show of weakness. It's not some sort of deficiency on your part. It's just a natural point of life. We all hit fatigue. So I think that's step one on identifying it. once you've identified that you're in that fatigue state, just like you may not completely stop working out because you're tired, but you might change what you're focused on, right? Instead of doing arms, maybe you're going to work on legs. Maybe instead of running, you're going to take a walk because that's where you're at today. And I think that is a similar approach that I take when I start to feel fatigued on work is I try to find something either that I can redirect my efforts towards that it reignites that passion and kind of counteracts that fatigue. Or, I listen to my, body mental state and say, okay, maybe today it's okay if I give myself a little bit of grace and use it as a recoup day. I'm going to sit in my pajamas all day and, play video games. So, whatever the case may be, you know, I think it's perfectly fine to acknowledge that and then make adjustments in your life, just like you would if you were working on a physical improvement plan. Because when you're talking about work fatigue, more often than not, it's probably a mental fatigue. And having that mental workout plan be adjusted, I think is perfectly appropriate. It's my initial idea.
It sounds like you handle fatigue with a strategy.
Yes.
And that's why I bring this topic up, because you mentioned like at the gym or like even at the workplace, when things get a little bit too much, you kind of strive for that quick win, quick like reignition, kind of motivating objective, and you prioritize that because you're just drained. My thoughts really are that works really well for like us three individuals, because I do the same as well. It's a strategy that I feel is almost foolproof for handling it. But what I do seem to recognize often is there's a lot of those who just can't get past. They might be able to recognize it, like you mentioned at the gym, like whenever they can't really put up any more weight and they're just drained. But it kind of backs them in the corner sometimes where they just don't know what to do. They don't think about a game plan or a strategy, and it causes you. So if we talk about a workplace setting, like if things are just overwhelming, you kind of just block it all out and just panic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like what's really important about this topic for me is what I notice with a lot of people who don't believe they can be high performers is once they hit that panic mode, they go home, they do the bare minimum they can just to take the mental stress relief away, which is fine. But the problem is, as I noticed, they come back to the workplace the next day with a really bad taste in their mouth, like a really bad, no game plan, no like thoughts on how they're going to tackle the day and make it better than the previous, or like lighten up the load. And it's dangerous almost. And I think when a lot of people approach me and they might mention any like notes of like being a high performer or someone who doesn't fatigue, like it's not the case at all. It's just the strategy handled towards reaching my limit. And I feel that is such, like we talk about motivation, we talk about discipline often, but it's inevitable. You're going to see fatigue. And I mentioned this before, but again, I feel like we kind of center ourselves around those who are constantly putting themselves on camera, showing how highly motivated they are and how like their work ethic is, but we're not seeing the end of like the fatigue management. And so I really think that personal experience sits well with individuals, as well as just recognizing it, right? Because once you get to that point, coming up with a game plan is a lot more simpler than you think, but enacting it is where it really matters.
So this leads into something that I think that I've thought about before, and I actually just genuinely don't have an answer for, because you're talking about you're absolutely right. There's people who are like, they seem to be like almost naturally, quote unquote, like leaning towards like being a high performer. Like they're just like, to an average person, they're like psychopathically motivated and engaged at their work, and they're like pedal to the metal. And the average person is just sitting there like, they just want to come in and do their job, and they're like, like, how the hell do you like have all this energy? Like it's stressful as shit. Like, how are you doing this? Like, you seem to be in a good mood, generally speaking. Like, yes, you have bad days, but you still come in, you still like do all this. How? And it's one of those things where, at least for me, I have two modes at work. And I think like I'm one of those like weird people that I don't know. It's just like the way my brain is wired. There's like these two things. So either I'm not engaged enough, or I'm like hyper engaged, like to the max, and I don't sit in between either of them almost ever. And it's just weird. Like I don't know how to. I've never been the type of person that's good at doing something like halfway. It's either like 100% or 0%. And like, so at work, the struggle I run into is like, if I'm not like switched on enough and I'm not engaged, I'm not invested, then I get fatigued by the lack of stuff going on, and it leads me to not want to do more. Actually, like the lack of stuff leads to me wanting to do less, not more. Like, right, you think, oh, you're getting a break. It's like, no, I'm like, now I'd never even want to ramp up to 100 again, right? So I like really avoiding that. And then the other one is like that I tend to struggle with as well. There's obviously downsides, is being like that 100% like put way too much on my plate, try to like min max everything, every single thing I do at work, and try to just just juice everything I can out of it, because I like that. Like that's how I even play games. I like view it as a game, like where it's like I want to get the maximum value out of this. I want to be the best I can possibly be, like, because I get fulfillment and enjoyment out of striving to do great things and to be the best. If I don't do that, I actually struggle to find any meaning or fulfillment or enjoyment out of the work that I do. And so when people like, or even myself, like try to think, well, how do I like find a better balance? I just haven't found an answer, because the only way I've really been able to get true happiness and fulfillment at work is when I'm like being psychopathic, almost like where I'm like doing like way too much, probably to like an outsider looking in. And honestly, the answer that I'm leaning towards is that I don't think it's actually possible to be truly happy with like your production at work unless you're fully invested into your work. And I think that's the hard part that people face, is that like they don't know how to, or they don't want to be that, right? I don't know what you
Yeah,
think,
I
though.
kind of I see Colby kind of saying he manages fatigue honestly by directing his interest in finding passion in the work that he does, right? Because at the end of the day, there might be a week where he's just feeling a little slow, but he's invested into the work that he's doing. So in an overall like circumference of everything, he's going to step back in and feel emotionally involved in the work he's doing again. And I think that's like one subliminal way of kind of handling fatigue, because if you never did that, you might be stuck in that infinite loop of someone who doesn't know how to strategically handle fatigue, and they get stuck in that, okay, I guess I got to go to work now kind of mindset. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
I've got two thoughts here. One is, Colby, you're not the weird guy. My wife all the time talks about how I'm an extremist, right? I'm either all in or all out on things. So I think that's probably more common.
Real quick, Josh, do you think that's just one of those society like stereotypes that just aren't true? Like being that middle ground, I don't think it exists.
I think it's so difficult, right, to go middle ground on anything, because you're naturally like prone. I think over time you can get better and better trying to make small adjustments to it, but it kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week, where you're essentially trying to train your subconscious to act a particular way. Because when you're left to just your instinctual nature, you tend to default into a mode, and a lot of us default into a, farther one way than the other. There's hardly anyone that actually strikes that middle ground all the time. And if they do, congrats. You should be on our podcast and tell us how to do it, because we'd love to learn. But yeah, I think everyone's striving for it, because obviously you want the best of both worlds. We all want our cake and to eat it too. But sometimes you just got to eat the cake and be happy that you had it. Appreciate what you have rather than be upset about what you're missing out on. But Colby, I wanted to ask you to follow up on kind of what you were talking about, right? When you think about your work production or what's going on, what time spans are you thinking about that in? Is it this day? Is it this week? Is it this year? Or is it like this career?
I would say all of them. It just depends on what it is. So like, right, like I definitely think about my career as a whole, like very frequently, just because like I'm very motivated to advance and do more, have more, etc., all those sort of things. So I definitely think about like that, and how each of my weeks are lead, if I like have a week and I review that week, how would that week, lead into a year? If I did that week for 52 times, what would my year look like? And would that advance my goals? Would that achieve the goals that I'm looking for? Right. So I definitely keep that in mind. But then for like actual like work productivity, depending on the scope of the task, project, or that I'm doing, I would say it really depends, right? So I think frequently it's usually like weeks and months, but I definitely like come into my days like with like a general idea of like what I want to accomplish in that day. But yeah, I would say like I think it's healthily or like evenly distributed amongst it.
Okay. And I was just curious because one of the strategies I have found to be helpful, going back to Shan's question on, or possibly even yours, Colby, about how people come in and they're, upbeat most of the time and still pursuing things. I've found that a longer term vision helps with that, because it allows me to organize kind of my larger objectives, and I worry less about maybe all of the small details, right? If I'm trying to move from point A to point B over the period of 6 months or a year or even a week, if I have a bad Tuesday during that week, I can kind of shake it off because I still have Wednesday and Thursday to get to where I wanted to be on Friday. Whereas I have found in the past, if I'm focused on the one thing that I'm doing, which still happens from time to time, don't get me wrong, but when I get there, I see that frustration builds up a little bit easier. And I think that's why they give you the advice to like go away, right? Take a break, step away, do something else. Just get your mind kind of freed up, and that stress or that fatigue kind of, I guess, taking it back to the workplace analogy. I don't know when I became the analogy guy here, Colby, but or the working out one. But it's almost like a negative workout, right? Like when you're focused on one thing and you just don't take a break when you hit that wall, you're literally trying to hold, that weight or your body weight up on the bar. And anyone that's tried one of those things at the fair where you just try to hold yourself up, it doesn't take long until you're like struggling, and then you're at ultimate fatigue. Whereas if you just got down, you can get back up and hold yourself super easy a whole bunch of times. I don't know, maybe that's a weird analogy, but that's kind of what I thought of when I was thinking of workplace fatigue and how to manage it over a long-term time. Are the people that you see running around with that extra energy and extra optimism, are they just kind of hopping up and down and hitting targets and moving on? Or are they like literally latched onto something trying to hold the weight of everything up?
Yeah.
No, I agree with your goal orientation, and kind of it relates a lot with what we talk about because it's important for discipline, it's important for motivation, but I think it's extremely important for fatigue, but in a different idea. So for setting goals, I think it's more of a preventative maintenance plan for fatigue, because I think you kind of set your meter for how much it kind of takes to burn you out, dependent on what your overall goal is. Because if you're operating blindly, you don't have any goals, you can tire out pretty quickly. If you just go to the gym, that's back to your analogy. If I just go to the gym, I don't have a weight goal, I don't have a strength goal. I'm just kind of going because I know I need to like stay in shape. I'm going to tire out pretty quick, or I might not tire out, but 20 minutes might go by and I'm like, yeah, I did enough.
Right.
And I personally go through that often.
Yep.
So you don't really think about it because you're trying to intertwine it with, again, motivation and discipline. But in reality, it's just preventative maintenance on your burnout.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm getting at with this whole work fatigue, because it happens in business. It happens at the workplace. It happens in any personal goal. Like, it's just hard to stay consistent whenever you're feeling that sense of just being burnt out. And again, like, we talk about it, us three, in these cool strategies, and it sounds great to us. But what like sticks in the back of my mind is the people who unfortunately don't find a light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to managing fatigue. And they just, like, you can just see it in some people. It's just stuck. It has them in this certain mindset where it's just kind of getting by, and they don't have. And it's not that everyone needs to have high aspirations or be highly motivated, but I think that has a lot to do with someone who's got a motivated mindset. So I often think about it all the time.
Yeah. And I think one of the challenges that people face when they find themselves in this fatigued mode, especially if they don't catch it early on, but they find themselves deeper and deeper in it, is usually it's going to take some effort to get yourself out of that fatigue mode and free up enough bandwidth to kind of re-engage, right? Whether that's going to do something that you're tired and you know going out with your friends might kind of re-engage you, but you're also tired and you're like, hey, the couch sounds all right. Now, you may not get engaged from the couch, but you make kind of that choice. And I think you can see that in a lot of different things. Because even if we go back to kind of the planning portion and we talk about planning and organizing, that takes effort. But then it also frees up your mind because you're no longer running through your day trying to think, okay, what do I need to do next? Because you've already taken the time up front and kind of relieve that burden. But it does take an investment on the front end to get yourself sometimes recharged and out of that fatigue mode. And it takes you to almost push yourself beyond fatigue, kind of going back to that running analogy earlier. There are times where you need to push through. And when you're in that fatigue mode and the only way to get out of it is to go through it, you've got to push through and get to the point where you can create some buffer for yourself, whether that's through organizing and planning what you're going to do, whether that's taking time out to recharge yourself, whatever that looks like for you. You may have to expend that effort to get the benefit back and free up a little bit of that mental capacity or free up a little bit of that reserve energy and take some of that stress away.
Yeah, I wanted to bring this up in relationship to what you guys are talking about. So do you think that you can appropriately deal with work fatigue over a long period of time without being very invested in your work life?
I think you're ultimately making it a challenge by not, right? Like that's kind of a whole nother discussion on what's blocking you from getting to that point. But I do, in a sense, feel that it is tough to step out of that, and that might be also what's causing fatigue too, because you're kind of doing something that you're not passionate about. So that meter becomes a lot smaller on what positions you to be burnt out. I see a lot of people in the service industry work through fatigue like that and not kind of get past that barrier. And the funny part is they don't understand that they're in work fatigue, because what they'll do is they'll call it their social battery, right? And a lot of people in the service industry or customer service or even like salesmen, they will use the term a lot, like my social battery is just drained. Well, you're honestly fatigued, and you just spent about 62 hours this week talking with someone on the phone or talking across the bar with someone or taking someone's order. Like that ultimately drives that meter down as well. And if it's not something you're not passionate about, or at least like you're not very social, I do have to say, Colby, that the passion will literally cause that meter to shrink and just be kind of impossible to manage. But there's different strategies, of course, and with what we're talking about on how to handle it. I just think your meter is ultimately smaller with something you're not passionately involved in.
And I agree with Shan, but I think it also comes down to what you focus on in the job, right? Even in a job that you're passionate about, there's going to be things that you don't enjoy. And I've told you guys numerous times, I tell tons of people this, I am not a technology guy. I never have been. I don't foresee me ever becoming one. It's been 20 plus years, though, that I've been in a technology field. But what I do love is helping people and encouraging people and helping them accomplish their goals and achieve, their objectives. And I've been able to do that in the technology field with my efforts. So if I had focused strictly on the cool tech, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes it's neat, but I don't know if it would have fueled me for 20 years, right? If tech is what I was focused on, this podcast would probably have different topics, right, that we would only be talking about. But because I love kind of empowering people to reach that next level and that personal and personnel development, depending on which way you're looking at it, that is a passion of mine. So that's how I've been able to keep my excitement and energy and not get fatigued over, multiple decades here, because I found what I loved in what I did. It's kind of that old bloom where you are type of thing.
Yeah. And that's I agree with you guys, and that's why I wanted to pose it, because it's one of those other things that I've just really thought about for a long time, is that piece. That's like, because I've had a lot of friends and known a lot of people who were not like me in the sense that they wanted to be engaged at work. They were just very like, man, it's just something I got to do for 8 hours a day, and then I want to go home, right? Like, there's just, and I can respect it to some degree, right? Like, it's not like, the most enjoyable things in life are usually outside of work. Not always. There's sometimes a lot of great fulfillment and enjoyment that can come from work, but like, a lot of the things that people would say were really important to them are obviously outside of the work, or outside of work, I would say, for the most part. And I get that, but then like, what I see is them hating work way more than myself or people who really invest themselves in their work. And a lot of the times I feel like it's difficult because they may be in a job where it's not very glamorous or very interesting. I don't know what a good example would be, but it's just like, I would say, let's just take something as simple as, being a janitor or some sort of like, cleaning like job, right? You come in, like, you have a like set amount of tasks you need to do, and you can come in and that's like set things that you do every single day, right? You may come in, you may be like, man, this sucks. I got to do this for 8 hours a day, right? Like, this is just, it's like you could throw a billion different things of like saying why you would not like to do that job, right? You may not like to clean toilets. You may not like to mop floors, whatever it is, right? You may not like the physical labor side of it. But to me, if I was in a situation like that, and I've, my first job was at Wendy's, like, I've cleaned bathrooms, like, I've worked at like, jobs like that before. So it's, my experience is like, to not loathe going into work, I have to at least want to do the best that I can at work, so I can be like, I did it well, right? There's like some pride element to it. Like, I can't just go in and just like not try, right? Because it's just like, I just dread it going into work every day. And yeah, like, I don't know, I think it's so important. Like, I think if you don't, I feel like that's like the first step that you have to take to have a healthy relationship with work. And I actually don't think there's another solution.
Yeah,
I haven't heard someone offer one that seems really compelling to me.
Yeah, I mean, you're circling around mindset again, right? You're looking at it as opportunities rather than an obligation. And even in those scenarios, like, take any business in the world, if they didn't have someone, taking care of the toilets and emptying the trash and doing all that, that business isn't going to last more than a week. I mean, literally, it's the trash is going to pile up. Like, everything contributes,
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. I always try to circle back to that, and I'll tell you, I make it a point to try and converse with employees from all walks that I run into, and some of those folks are the happiest, and they're putting in the most effort, and because they can see the contribution that their work does make, even if other people maybe don't always call it out because it is a little behind the scenes. They know that they're making a difference, and I think that kind of goes back to it too, is who are you evaluating yourself against, even on that work fatigue side of things? Are you upset because the level of work is not up to someone else's standard, or are you upset because it's not up to yours? And who's driving that fatigue for you? I think that's definitely the challenge at hand.
This is why I like the real life examples, or like the personal experiences, because I mean, you had me thinking about my own like workplace fatigue. So previously, there was times where I worked in other positions where I felt like there wasn't enough time in the day, and it just was highly motivated to knock something out. And I noticed they always seem to be in problem solving environments, like to where like whatever I'm working towards will either like it like in a either affect a large group of individuals or make the work experience better for a whole department. Like getting some kind of fulfilling feeling whenever I'm finished with the work, or like tackling that problem solving solution. Whereas like now, I don't really suffer from work fatigue too much now, but I do notice a little bit less of that inspirational motivation. And I think it's because I'm like doing more, what would I call it? More preemptive solution and problem solving. Like I'm creating solutions that haven't necessarily broken yet, or haven't necessarily like been introduced to a department that could save them time or anything. It's just something that is happening from my end of things instead of personal experience from others. So like I really like I like your guys' experiences because it makes me reflect. And Colby, what you mentioned about like being motivated in that environment, that I really never thought about like that. And when it comes to work fatigue, it usually hits me and I'm burnt out and I'm like, man, I'm just tired. Like I'm burnt out. I never really think about like, well, you're not necessarily feeling the most fulfilled or the most passionate about what you're doing right now. Because it could be a specific project. It could be a slow season for your business, or it could be like the gym again. Like the gym, you're passionate about looking a certain way, and then you look that way, and now what? Yeah. So it really makes me reflect back and think about how I can like strategize over handling that fatigue.
Yeah, and I think you can achieve a sense of motivation over the smallest things at your job too. Because like I said, I think at the end of the day, it's just about making things better, either for yourself, for the company, the people that you work with, etc. Making things better is the easiest way to, I don't know, get back that motivation, I guess. Because like to me, if things aren't getting better, there's either just natural empathy or entropy occurring, or things are getting worse. And like no one is going to be happy, excited, or motivated if things are just like entropy over time, or like you're contributing to making something worse. Anytime if you're in a state like that, there's no way you're going to tell me with a straight face that you're excited to come into work and do that.
Right.
But I would guarantee anyone that's contributing to something positive or making something better would be happy to some degree about that, right? And I think it's just about like having that mindset coming to work is like, how could I make my job or someone else's job 1% better today, or 5% better today, right? Like, how could I make this process 5% better? Like, I think it's fun and fulfilling to build something than it is to watch it slowly erode or be destroyed and be an active participant in its destruction. So it's like, to me, it's like the first step. And if you can't take that step, then I wouldn't even worry about your fatigue, because it's just always going to be there to some extent. In my personal opinion, like, I think it's just that brutal. But I'm open to like being wrong about that. I think it's hard. But I know we're coming up on time and everything. So I did want to bring up a topic that I had that's very closely related to this. And it's kind of like the opposite, where you have what we're talking about, where someone maybe is like trying to be invested at work. But in this Reddit thread I was looking at, this person was talking about being too invested at work, like their identity, their sense of self-worth, everything it seems like that they value about themselves is tied into their job and their work life. And they've noticed that it started causing them personal problems. They haven't outlined exactly what personal problems they've noticed from it, but they're just basically like, how do you unravel this problem, right? And I think it's just
strong. Sorry, I have strong opinions on this one, but continue your thought. I thought you were breaking there.
No, you're good. Yeah, I was just wrapping up. So go ahead.
Work is a natural part of our existence. I think it fulfills us. I think it gives us purpose a lot of the times, but it can't be our identity, because I'm going to tell you, everyone here, a secret that they already know. If, God forbid, something happened tomorrow, right, and you could no longer work at your place of employment, or you won the lotto and decided to no longer work at your place of employment, good or bad, whatever occurs, that business will fulfill or refill that position, right? Everyone is borrowing a position. And I say this all the time. And most of the time I'm talking about training people to replace me, because I feel like that's a job as a leader, is to kind of train up everyone behind you to take your spot. Because again, we're all borrowing a position, but it goes both ways. So I will be the first one to appreciate someone dedicating and putting extra effort in to really accomplish work tasks. I'm very goal-oriented, very focused on ensuring we have the best team and we do some amazing things. So that might sound a little bit counter, but what I also try to always encourage is that balance, because again, work, there's always going to be more to do tomorrow. And not that your workplace doesn't care about you. You probably most people probably are cared about in their work environment. But again, the reality of that situation is at some point, if you have to leave or you can no longer fulfill that role, they're going to fill that role and continue on. It's very different than, say, your even friends, right? It's a little harder to separate from friends typically. Family gets even more complex a lot of the times. Like those connections typically aren't, well, you pick up a new job, you don't start talking to your mom or stop talking to your mom, right? Like you pick up a new job, you may or may not keep ties with some of the people you used to work with. So when you're looking at how to balance that, yes, you want to put your best foot forward in the office, and yes, you want to give as much as you can comfortably give to succeed in those roles, but you have to be careful not to let it consume what your identity is. Because let's say even if you gave everything to your job and you were fully bought in, and then for whatever reason the company decides to downsize or lay off and now you're gone, and that position's eliminated, you still have an identity, but you're going to be in an identity crisis because you've aligned it so much with that role. So I think, yes, give your all at work, do the best you can, but never sacrifice that for your own personal well-being and identity. There's my bit.
Josh literally said everything that was going on in my mind to a T. Like I couldn't agree more. And just to be even more blunt and Josh and just quick to it, get a life. Like, and what I mean by that, it sounds terrible, but in reality, like it's the only thing you can do to kind of save yourself, right? Because in this person's scenario, they probably mentioned it's affecting them personally from exactly what Josh said. So reiterating on that, they have a wife or a husband at home, they have kids. Those kids, that husband, that wife, they're recognizing, hey, you're not giving it much attention at home. You're so focused on work. It just seems like that's the only thing important to you. Biggest hole in that philosophy, right? Of like being too involved with work. And the other likely scenario is there might not be a wife, there might be a husband, there might not be kids, there might not be a mom. And then that's when that identity crisis will really hit if something ever happens, because if you don't personally develop your own life, you kind of lose that purpose, or at least the purpose is attached to your work environment. And that can be dangerous because that's a lot less controllable than what your personal life might consist of. Yeah. So I couldn't agree more with what Josh said. And I think that's to a T, 100%.
I definitely agree with you guys for sure. I think the one thing that I would bring up is I think it's important to understand why you have noticed that you're essentially addicted to work. And I think it's because, at least in my personal opinion, because I've noticed this about myself, and it's kind of what actually motivates me to be involved at work, is that I think a lot of people have a propensity to be addicted to something that like they're really excellent at. And it's hard to let that go, right? Especially if it's the only piece of like it's the only thing in your life that you were excellent at. It's really tough to spend less time doing it because you enjoy it so much. Or maybe maybe you don't necessarily enjoy it. I think to some degree you have to if you're in the situation, because at least subconsciously like you're addicted to it to some degree, I think. At least in my personal experience. And so I think it's important to recognize that, right? It's like some people genuinely do just love the grind, they love the work, they love the excellence that they achieve at work. Like it's really exciting. It's kind of like when you play a sport or something like that and you're really good at it. It's really fulfilling and exciting and fun to be good at something. Anyone can really resonate with that. And that's probably what's happening at work. But the thing is, you can do that in anything. It doesn't have to be work. And I think that's the thing you have to recognize, is that there's plenty of hobbies or things you can do outside of work that you could be really great and excellent at, and you could pick something up.
It could be the same thing too, Colby. I mean, if you for some reason love mowing lawns for your day to day, come home and join the HOA community. Like do something that relates to your passion on a personal level, because unfortunately when you don't manage that balance, it just becomes dangerous and it's hard. That's exactly probably what's going on for this individual. It's not that they're too into work, it's that they're not into their personal life nearly as much, and that balance isn't spread. And if your argument, like you mentioned, Colby, 100%, like if you're extremely good at something, that's generally why those people become, we all know those people who are way too into their job. It's usually why, because they're really good at it. But there's almost in every scenario you can take that home with you and find out how to passionately be good at that in a personal setting.
For sure. And that's the thing that like I think you have to recognize too, is like you can't just like all of a sudden like turn work down to zero. That you're not going to want to do that because you're already like addicted to it. You just have to start like slowly introducing things into your life that aren't that you can start to be good at as well, and recognize that, oh yeah, this is fun, I like doing this, and then you get good at it, and you start to branch out like Shan's saying.
I think it's important to note too, though, like obviously, yes, all of this makes sense, but there's also those folks that I think throw themselves into work to maybe escape certain aspects of their life, right? And I think that can be a challenge too when you're looking at why are they throwing themselves into work. Maybe it's not that that's all. Maybe it's not where they have put all of their chips, but it's the only place they feel like they can, really, I guess, escape. So,
Right.
When you're seeing someone in that situation, I think it is important to kind of understand where they're coming from, and kind of be that support and help them, if it makes sense. If not, obviously, hopefully there are people around that can help them. But I think, just to kind of sum things up before we jump into final thoughts here, I think really it comes back to what we were talking about with the extremist part earlier and operating in the extremes, trying to find that middle ground. And the best way to do that is through that strategic planning to, I've said this a million times, you want to guide your life, not have life guide you. Um, are you making the choices that you are you letting things happen to you? And I think if you can get that figured out, you'll be closer to being in the middle of those areas and having that balance that we all strive for.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Shan, you brought the initial question, so I think it's only fitting that you start us off here on final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I really did learn a lot from your guys' perspectives and experience with this one. And the way I'd kind of wrap it up is, I'm sticking to analogies, right? Like you want to have the largest meter you can when it comes to work fatigue and being burnt out. And from what I've heard in your experiences and what I've kind of summarized is the way to increase that meter is to find your passion. Make sure that, or at least instill some passion in the work that you're doing. Find some fulfillment in it, because at the end of the day, like if you're doing something you absolutely hate, I don't think there's a strong strategy for overcoming the burnout, because it's just something that is mentally, capping your creativity early. The second piece of that too, kind of goes along the lines with Josh's plan for like handling it with a strategy. So I brought up the question of recognizing fatigue, because I think that is that's a huge issue for a lot of individuals. But once you begin to recognize that you're burnt out, is handling it with an actual strategy is really the only way to kind of overcome it. Instead of waking up the next day and going to work after being burnt out and just getting by, try to tackle that that smaller issue or something that's been on the backlog that is a quick win, just to kind of reignite some motivation and make that meter again a little bit larger. And then the last thing too is when you meant, sorry Josh, I'm probably going to take up your whole summary, but goal setting, right? So that's something coming into this podcast today that I did not think about one bit. I did not think about the importance of setting like career or business or personal goals. And especially when it comes to the gym analogy, I think that's really clear now. If I'm just showing up at the gym and I'm just jumping on the treadmill because I know it's good for me, there's not going to be a lot of great results. But if I want to look a certain way, if I want to feel a certain way, that changes the game. And I think everyone, or at least most of our viewers, can relate to that.
Yep.
Yeah. Colby, what you got for us, sir?
I would say two things. One we've already touched on quite a bit, and that's the whole, the step one kind of dealing with work fatigue. And in my opinion, if anyone disagrees and has a good counter argument, leave it down in the comments, because I'd definitely love to read it. But is that you need to like actually be invested at work to some degree. You have to want to come in and to do a good job to help push things in a positive direction. And if you can't do that, it's very hard to deal with being fatigued at work because it's just gonna feel awful in my opinion. Just because if you're not contributing to something positive, it's either entropy or it's contributing to something destructive, neither of which are fun to be involved with. And that's just, to me, it's a fact, and I don't really see any way around that. Two, we didn't really touch on this part very much, but you will never recognize fatigue unless you're super mentally aware, or if you actually carve out time in your day to actually reflect on what's happening with you and everything around you. I think that's extremely important, especially in today's age where pretty much you try to like squeeze out every amount of time you can to be as productive as possible or to accomplish the things that you need to accomplish in a given day with whatever obligations you have. And there was actually something that was really interesting that I'm gonna try. It's gonna seem really weird, but this guy, Healthy Gamer on YouTube, I think he's a psychiatrist. I don't know, he's some sort of doctor. But anyways, he had a really interesting perspective on this, where he was basically getting people that were struggling with this kind of thing to realize that in his exercise he would give to them is stare at a wall for 30 minutes. And the whole point of the exercise is to basically realize that you can sit down and be still and not be engaged with something for 30 minutes, and that you can actually be alone with your thoughts essentially and deal with the shit that's going on in your life instead of distracting yourself from it. And I think that's like super critical, because you'll never make a strategy, you'll never realize what's going on unless you have time to actually do those things. And so it doesn't need to be a daily thing. Like, I don't do this every day. Like, there's some moderate amount of reflection that's done every day, I would say. But really sitting down and be like, man, like, how are things going? I know I tend to do this in the shower, like, and I'll take like long showers that are like 15 minutes sometimes and just like
Movie
sit
scene
there and
style.
yeah, exactly. And I'm just like, man, like, how are things going? It's been a month, how did things go? Am I happy with it? Do I need to change anything? Or is it just I'm tired and I need to relax and I'm overthinking it, right? Like, that's just it. You just need time. So I would just say like those two things are really critical for dealing with this sort of stuff.
Yeah. My brain went instantly to you being able to kind of combine those two things and take a 30-minute shower staring at the wall, and you'll be good.
There you go. Problem solved.
Two birds, one stone. No, I think you guys have some great points. I guess my encouragement here would be that this isn't gonna, if you find yourself in a fatigued environment, it's not necessarily going to be corrected overnight. It may take some time to get yourself back. If we go into the gym analogy again, you don't go from benching the bar to benching 300 pounds, the full Olympic set, right? You don't go from running a 15-minute mile to a 5-minute mile. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes energy. Even if you go out, let's say you pull an all-nighter for some reason, or you don't sleep well one night, it can take you a couple of days to kind of feel recharged again of good night's sleep. So it may not be an immediate process, but if you trust the process, you'll get there. And Colby, one other point that I wasn't going to mention until your part, but I actually listened to a different podcast the other day, and they were talking about creating some of that bandwidth. You're talking about looking at the wall. They were actually talking about how they have turned their phone into kind of a non-distraction. I know you've talked about this too. And so anything that pulls them to the phone, they've removed. So anything that they might check, like email or some sort of messaging platform, social media, anything that's going to have a notification bubble that draws them, they've pretty much removed that. So they leave things on there that still make it super helpful. And when I say when I was a kid, if someone told me I could pick up a magic box, make calls and use a calculator and, stopwatch and all of this stuff that doesn't draw me and pull me into, I have to open this, but it's still an awesome tool. I think that freeing up some of that constant pull on us can also help with that mental fatigue, and maybe help that Reddit poster strike a work-life balance, right? Because he's not constantly being pulled into the office. But hey, Colby said it before. Maybe you disagree with me, and that's fine. Or maybe you agree with me. That's fine too. But let us know. post down below in the comments, and we'll be sure to respond to those and get back with you. And who knows, maybe if you even have topics for us, we'll discuss them next time on Mastermind for the Masses. So until then, share with your friends. Don't keep this all to yourself. That's just selfish. Share with them, and like and 5-star review and all the good stuff. And we will see you next time here on Mastermind with the Masses. Thanks, everyone.